Guys, so today we will look at the end of the feudal system. Now, we will look at it through two different people. The first is a knight wearing a helmet, and let's call him Sir Winston. The second is a peasant, and let's call him Bob. Alright, so as you remember, the feudal system is like a pyramid with kings, nobles, knights, and peasants. Bob goes on the bottom, Winston goes right above him. So far so good. Now, traditionally, knights like Winston would have fought the battles. They would have been above the peasants, and Bob would have worked the ground. He would have been a farmer. He works the ground, and he gives a little bit of food to the knights in return for the production. Right? That's how the feudal system used to work. But things started to change. There were a series of wars in the Middle East called the Crusades, and knights like Winston would have gone there, riding out in full armor, to fight the Muslims. And their excuse was that they wanted to take the Holy Land away from the Muslims back to where it used to be. Unfortunately for many of the knights, they died in battle, and in fact, so many knights died that the feudal system started to fall apart a little bit. Many peasants, even though many did still work the land, like Bob, many other peasants actually started to run away. They started to leave the estates where they used to work and go to the towns because so many of the knights had died. Okay? So the feudal system, as you remember, king, nobles, knights, and peasants, it started to get a little bit imbalanced because so many knights had died and so many of the peasants were leaving. So that already is causing problems for the feudal system. That's not all that happened. Something else also caused trouble for the feudal system. Fast forward a few years to Bob's grandson, still a farmer, but in the 14th century a deadly disease broke out in Europe. It killed many people. It was called the Black Death. Now the Black Death killed many people. It killed peasants, knights, and nobles. Maybe more than a third of all people in Europe. So now the feudal system was weakened even more. You still had the king, the nobles, the knights, and the peasants. But as you remember, a lot of the knights had already died in the Crusades, and a lot of the peasants had stopped working for the knights and ran away. But now a lot of peasants had died because of the Black Death. So at this point, Bob's grandson decides to run away to the town to make a better living. There he goes. So he wants to make a better living for himself, and he becomes a shoemaker. And I obviously have no idea how people make shoes. Now, as more and more peasants decided to go to the towns, these towns, they became larger and more important. So by now, the feudal system was very weak. But at the same time, you had the towns becoming more and more important. So we had what we call a changing balance of power. We've looked at how the feudal system fell apart. Now let's look at what happened in terms of thinking. Now, one effect of the Black Death, with so many people dying all over Europe, was that people started to think more and more about this life, instead of just thinking about heaven and about the church. Many people started to celebrate this life because they were just so happy to be alive. Now, related to that was another new way of thinking about attitudes to the church. Now, the church had always been respected, but after the Black Death, many people were thinking, why couldn't you help us? The church was supposed to pray for the people and they'd get better, but so many people died. So this led to another new way of thinking. Maybe the church isn't right about everything. Many people started to think their own thoughts. They started to think about the world, society, and even God. They started to question the way the church had taught about life. But that wasn't the only change to the way people thought. Now, Not all the knights had died in the Crusades. A lot of them came back to Europe as rich men, plunder and treasures from the East, especially books from the East, written by the ancient Greeks but translated by the Muslims. Now, these were read more and more in the growing number of universities in Europe at the time. There it goes, reading. Now, this was in contrast to the old way of education, which involved monks teaching people how to read and write in the monasteries. Now, all of this changed the way people thought. There were very slow but sure changes in the way people thought. The church was losing some of its influence in the way people were thinking about life, and this prepared the way for the Renaissance. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.